Hello and welcome to the special section broadcast brought to you by the Southeast Arrow. My name is Kyler Messenger, and alongside me, Dr. Kevin Timlin, the Executive Director of International Education and Services. Mr. Timlin?
How you doing, Kyler? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great, Dr. Timlin. It's great to have you as well. Before we get this interview started, I want to just give the people a little bit of a background on yourself. So tell us about yourself and how you got here to SEMO.
Sure. So I came here in July of 2016, so I'm a little over 9 years here. I was telling you beforehand, I'm originally from Iowa. I went to undergrad school at Northern Iowa. Didn't have anything to do with international students or study abroad at that point. This was the early 90s. International education isn't nearly what it is now. After graduating, I had an English degree, didn't know what I wanted to do. I traveled around the country, ended up joining the Peace Corps, thinking that I wanted to be a teacher. And in my mind, I would go into the Peace Corps, teach for 2 years. If I liked it, I'd come back to the U.S., get my teaching certificate, be a coach, and my career would be made. What I didn't know, I went to the Kyrgyz Republic, which is a former Soviet republic. This was in the mid-90s. What I didn't know is almost every single kid that I was teaching English to would say, my dream is to go to the United States and study. I had nothing to do with international students as an undergrad. I didn't study abroad. This was just a revelation to me. And so that whole world of international higher education opened up to me. Peace Corps was formative for me. I found my wife there, who was another Peace Corps volunteer. I found an academic career. My doctorate is in international higher education, and I found a career. And so, you know, it's really my experience as being a Peace Corps volunteer in a country where I knew little of the language and the culture and had to learn it hands-on that informs what I do as a professional. You know, my interest and passion for serving international students and kind of, you know, advocating for the value that they bring to campuses and communities is rooted in that kind of background and experience. And so, you know, I've worked at the University of Oklahoma, Western Illinois, Northern Michigan on my route here, and have degrees also from Oklahoma and the University of Minnesota. So I've got a lot of experience. I've been in international higher ed for close to 25 years now.
Okay, well, it's very good to get to know you, Dr. Timlin. It seems like SEMO is in great hands, very passionate, you're very experienced. It's very cool to see. Before we get into our topics today of the international student environment and what is going on in the world right now, I'm just going to give you a quick definition of the word crisis. The definition of crisis is a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. Like many U.S. universities, SEMO has seen fluctuations in international student enrollment. In recent years, would you consider international students in America to be in a crisis?
No, I wouldn't consider it to be at the level of a crisis. It is certainly a challenging time. There are certainly barriers for students from abroad to be studying in the United States. But, you know, if you take the longer picture or take the longer look, we've been fluctuating in this field since, frankly, 2016, 2017, with things that are happening in terms of geopolitical relationships. COVID was, I'd put COVID up there as a much bigger crisis to international students and international education than we are now. But I don't think we're at crisis level. There is still a lot of positive things happening. Just before I came here today, I learned of something that had happened in our field that we got some very good news from. So, you know, it's certainly a challenge. It's been a roller coaster in the last, you know, like I said, 10 years, 9 years or so. But I wouldn't necessarily say that we're at a crisis stage right now.
Okay, that's going to kind of bring us into our first section, which is the impact of international students here at SEMO and at the world. To get us started, how would you personally describe the role international students play in shaping the culture and academic environment here at SEMO?
You know, I'm a big believer, and I have a comparative perspective. So, you know, a lot of our international students come from, you know, higher ed environments in which a professor simply just lectures. And there's no input from the student, there's no kind of discussion, there's no group work, it's just, you know, a semester worth of lecturing, and then you take a test, and then you're done. And the professor is kind of up here, and the students are down here. What we have in the U.S. is very, very different. We believe that our university, other universities like it, are an educational community. And we don't just learn from the professor. The reason that we have group work and presentations is we get to learn from students as well. Everybody who's a member of our educational community has the ability to inform and the ability to learn from everybody else in the educational community. So with that in mind, more diversity, more experiences, different backgrounds bring more awareness and understanding to the educational community. And I think, to me, that's the biggest role that international students play. It's not that, it's a lot like domestic students. Not every student is a 4.0 student and contributes greatly to the campus or the classroom or the community, and it's the same for international students. But our international students, we ask them, we challenge them to be ambassadors, unofficial ambassadors from their home countries here on campus, because it's entirely possible that a person from Scott City, I'm not picking on Scott City, but they may have never been out of the state, or they may have never been on an airplane, they've never met people from abroad. This may be the first and only time they meet somebody from Bangladesh. And that ability to make connections, to humanize, to kind of bring understanding, I think is very, very important in what we should be doing in an educational community. So to me, first and foremost, that's the value, and that's what international students bring to an educational environment, is just increased awareness, understanding of different ways to do things, that we don't want to get stuck in, this is the only way that we can do things. People with broad experiences have different ideas that we can all learn from.
Absolutely. Great point that you make there. Tell me just more specifically, just kind of the unique perspectives or skills that you've seen international students bring to SEMO.
Well, I think that, what I said, that you don't really realize how big the world is until you've actually been out in it a little bit. That we're all kind of conditioned to think that our world is as far out as we can see. And if you've never had that kind of realization that, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you could do it this way, or I didn't know that there was a different way to do that. There's different countries and cultures have languages and different types of values and different ways of approaching problems. We're all culturally conditioned to kind of deal with conflict in a certain way. And when you interact and understand people from different places, you see that it's not really right or wrong, it's just different. And so I think that's the main kind of attribute that they can bring, is awareness and kind of a better understanding of, not to, more than one way to skin a cat, I guess, is kind of what I think of off the top of my head, is that you can do things in a lot of different ways, and you don't know that until you kind of have that experience and understanding. And I keep coming back to the term empathy too, that the more you understand different people and different cultures, the more you kind of have a complex worldview, the more empathetic you are to different people and what they may be going through. And it's learning experiences, it's caring experiences.
So what do you think it is about international students as a whole that they bring over this feeling of empathy? Like, you feel that, where does that come from as compared to a domestic student?
Well, I think it's just, based in the fact that, I back to this idea of culture, that culture is something that is taught, it's transmitted, it's learned. When you're in your own culture, your grandparents, your teachers, your friends, the movies you watch, the TV shows, they're all teaching you, this is how you do things, this is how you act, this is what's appropriate in this context. And we don't always realize that we're being taught culture, but we certainly are. And so when you get a person that was taught a different culture, that's interacting with people who kind of only knew that this is the way that things can be done, is that attribute that like I think about the term cool. Like our international students, if you think about it, like getting a college degree is hard. It's hard work, it's intellectual, you gotta be perseverant. Imagine doing it outside of your entire support network that you've had your entire life. Imagine doing it sometimes in a language that isn't your first or second language. I mean, most of our students, our domestic students, only know one language. So you kind of get to the point where these are incredibly accomplished, incredibly motivated, incredibly intelligent students who in their own cultural context knows exactly what to do if they meet a professor on the street. They know what's cool, they know what isn't cool, they know, in their own context, they're very accomplished. But then you put them in this different environment, and sometimes they're all like, I don't know how to be cool here. I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I don't know if this is the right way to greet my professor. So you kind of, and this is kind of based on my own personal experience, you kind of empathize with them. But not from a charity perspective, or not, that they're lesser. It's just they're in a very different environment, and the idea that they are here to learn and to accomplish something, but the idea that we all have something to learn from them is important too. And I think that kind of plays into the empathy part of it.
100%. I want you to kind of imagine, I know we don't want to, but imagine kind of a dystopian society with me, just real quick. SEMO international students, there's no more international students at SEMO. What does that do to the campus, and how does that affect a university?
Well, I mean, I think that you could say that about a lot of different populations. You could say, what's it like without student athletes? What's it like without students from St. Louis? What's it like? Again, it's you're weakening that educational community. Absence of any one group changes the entire mix for everybody else. So, what I mentioned before about the unique things that international students bring to an educational community are absolutely true, but they're not the only pieces of that puzzle that make it all. So, I in terms of biodiversity and the ecology and things like that, the loss of any one kind of group that contributes to the whole can have catastrophic or challenging effects. So I wouldn't put international students apart from other populations in terms of their importance to our community.
Okay, I love that answer. Let's go ahead and take a look into our second section, some more logistics, the SEVIS and visa talk. For people who don't know what SEVIS is, could you kind of tell us what that abbreviation first stands for and what the group is?
Sure. So SEVIS is the Student Exchange Visitors Program, and it's SEVP is the administrating body in the Department of Homeland Security, but SEVIS, S-E-V-I-S, is the common acronym that we go by, is the federal database that was implemented after 9/11 that keeps track of all international students in the United States. So all of the documents that we issue for students to apply for visas, all of the things that we make sure that they're maintaining full-time enrollment, that they're meeting all the visa regulations and things like that, all of that happens in a very robust federal database called SEVIS. And again, this was all implemented after 9/11. So prior to 9/11, there wasn't a great deal of tracking, I shouldn't say tracking, but just kind of, I guess, tracking of student visas and people that were in the United States on those visas. But then again, this was largely at the beginning of the internet, and there weren't online databases in the same way that there are now. But what SEVIS meant to do is really give us information on those students who are here on student visas. And with that in mind, I think it's very important for people to understand that, we talk about immigration in terms of politics and in public discourse. International students are considered non-immigrants, that their visa type is classified as non-immigrants. So anybody who's coming on a student visa does not, through the F1 or J1 visa, have a direct pathway to permanent residency in the United States. So when we talk about immigration, these are non-immigrants. It's very different from undocumented and people who are coming here as refugees or asylees or something. These folks are classified as non-immigrants. And of this population, there is no more tracked and vetted population in the United States, largely because of SEVIS. So if I'm an international student and I want to come to the United States as a student, first I have to be vetted by the university. So I have to apply for admission, I have to demonstrate that I have the funds, I have to demonstrate that I have the English proficiency and that I have the academic background. So there's the first vetting. Once we've vetted that student and we've admitted them, we give them a document that allows them to apply for a student visa. Then they're vetted by the State Department or the embassy that they're applying for a visa for. You have to apply for a face-to-face interview with a consular officer. You have to answer questions. They do a background check. They do a social media screening. And after, or if you get through all of that, then you get your visa. Once you get to the United States, you have to go through Customs and Border Patrol. They have the ability to turn people away based on questions or based on information they have. Once they're in the United States, they have to come to the university. We have to verify every single semester that they're meeting full-time face-to-face enrollment, that they're not doing anything that puts them out of status, that they have a local address, and that they're maintaining satisfactory academic progress. So this population of students, the federal government, the universities have every single bit of information that they would possibly need from them at any given point at their fingertips. So this really isn't a population that should be considered to be a threat or, you know, taking away resources or anything like that. This is a well-vetted, well-qualified pool of people who contribute greatly to our campuses and our communities.
So when you're saying they're going through all these checks, are these all like in-person checks that these?
Well, the university application is obviously online. You know, some schools, not SEMO, if more selective, might have some kind of an interview process as part of the admissions process. The visa application is mandatorily in person. Customs and Border Patrol, once you show up at the border, they kind of go through your stuff. They talk to you. That's in person. And then it's every semester that we register them in the SEVIS status, register them as active in the SEVIS status, we have to have a bona fide local address to make sure, so it's not necessarily in person. But you can't get a visa to come and study as an international student and do online programs. That, you know, you could do that from anywhere. You're not going to get a visa to come to the US and study online. So international students have a requirement to have the majority of their courses face-to-face as opposed to online. So we verify enrollment with those professors. We verify to make sure that they're registering for the right things and that they're full-time. So there's a mix of kind of in-person types of verification and online verification.
When you guys are verifying this, like you and the people that you work with, what is kind of that process like if somebody's not up to par with, let's say, the standards?
Well, so we have Dr. Brooke DeArmond is the associate director of our office and the main person in charge of that. She does international student and scholar services. Most of that happens within the SEVIS system. So if a student, we have, you know, a software system that kind of gives us daily reports when we find out, okay, at the beginning of the semester, this student, we verify their full-time enrollment, the face-to-face requirements, and the local address. As long as we have everything, then we register them as active in SEVIS for that semester, and they remain so unless something happens. Those who are missing one of those, we are very proactive in terms of sending emails. You know, there may be registration holds in place or other things like that. We make phone calls and we do everything we can because that's a retention issue for the university. You know, and it is equally important as attracting new students is retaining the students that we have. And if our students aren't maintaining SEVIS status, then that's a retention issue. So we're very, very proactive in making sure that the people are doing what they need to do. If they don't, then we terminate them, their SEVIS record. And then that information is readily available to the Department of Homeland Security or USCIS, and that student is expected to leave the country within a certain period of time once they're out of status. Now, there are steps that they can take to regain status, but then they're kind of starting to accrue unlawful presence if they don't take care of whatever it is. So we're obligated by law to report students who aren't meeting those requirements.
100%. My next question for you is, who has access to that term? Like, who is able to terminate the SEVIS accounts for these students? Is it just the school? Is it the national government?
Well, so we have what's called every user at a university in SEVIS has to be registered as a designated school official, or DSO is the acronym. Any DSO has the ability to do anything with the records, our own records. I can't see what SLU has in St. Louis or something, but anybody who's on our records, we have the ability to make those changes or adjustments to their status. You know, I know that you've got questions about what happened last March. That was relatively new, and it was short-lived. That they found a number of students that had some kind of a legal issue, and behind the scenes in the State Department, they revoked the visa, but the Department of Homeland Security also terminated SEVIS status. And that, as far as I'm concerned, was unique. It used to be the DSOs, because we're the ones monitoring what the students are doing. We're the ones who are on the ground that can see exactly what they're doing. So it was, by and large, our call if we terminate the status. That was a really new thing where DHS did those terminations. It was short-lived. It was chaotic. It was traumatic for the students, but those students all had their SEVIS status reinstated, and that hasn't happened again. So there's a lot of kind of legal questions about that. If you want to get a little bit further in the weeds, what's always happened is, if I'm an international student and I'm doing everything that I need to do to maintain my status, but let's say I have a drunk driving arrest, or something happens, it has always been the case that if a student has a certain level of legal infraction, the State Department will revoke the visa. Now, nothing would happen with SEVIS status, which allowed the student to continue to be enrolled. Because what happens in international student kind of visa policy and federal policies is the visa only gets you into the country. So you need to, when you're admitted, you have to apply for a visa. You get the visa in your passport. That's the key to enter the United States when you get here. Once you're here, your SEVIS record is what you have to maintain status. So it doesn't matter if your visa is expired. As long as your SEVIS record is active and it's been constant, you're good. Now, if I had a drunk driving and they took away my visa, my SEVIS record is still good. The problem would be, if I ever go home, I would need to apply for a new visa before I can get back into the United States. So what has happened in the past was, if you had some kind of legal infraction, your SEVIS record was not adjusted or changed or anything, but your visa was. Mm-hmm. And the thought behind that was, if the legal infraction was such as any other domestic student, say they went to jail, or they couldn't go to classes anymore, now they're not meeting their full-time enrollment requirements, they're not attending classes, then we terminate the SEVIS record for that. Not necessarily because of the crime, but or the legal infraction, but because they're not able to maintain their status as a student. Mm-hmm. So that all kind of took care of itself. That one little blip in spring was an anomaly in which somebody else was adjusting that SEVIS record. But like I said, it was corrected, and it hasn't happened again since. We're hopeful that it won't happen again, but it should be the universities who are monitoring that.
Okay. Are you aware of any SEMO students that were affected by that last March?
Yep. I think publicly we had 24, 25 students. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. And they were all reinstated.
They were at SEMO that entire time that their SEVIS was terminated?
No, every student had a little bit of a different experience. When I say it was chaos and it was somewhat traumatic, there was a lot of ambiguity legally about what these students who were affected should do. And the advice from DHS was self-deport. Go home. Your status is terminated. You're going to be accruing unlawful presence. So some of our students did go home. When the SEVIS status was reinstated, their visas were not. So those folks couldn't get visas and weren't able to come back. So it was a little bit of a different situation. Some people got lawyers, and the lawyers kind of advised them to do certain things. I think during that period, that was the important thing that we were advising students is there was so much ambiguity, and we didn't know what was going on or what might happen from day to day, that the best thing that we could advise affected students was contact an immigration lawyer, because we don't have the expertise, we don't have a crystal ball. It's your life. Those are the people who can best advise you. And most of those who got visas were able to kind of stay the process and get their reinstatement and begin.
Okay, we're talking about visas a lot, so I just want to kind of get some clarification. Do you know, and can you run me through kind of the process of an international student getting a visa and kind of the troubles that they can have going through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so, like I said, you have to be admitted to a university. The university has to be authorized by the federal government to issue the documents to support, we're an SEVP approved school. If you're not SEVP approved, you can't support someone for a visa. So they have to apply. They get the document that has a SEVIS number. So once they're admitted, this document's called an I-20. They get a SEVIS number. They have to go online, pay a SEVIS fee, and schedule a face-to-face visa appointment at a nearby embassy or consulate office. It's been a real challenge lately to get those actual appointments. There's a scarcity of appointments, so it's making it difficult for students to actually be able to apply for those. But once they get the visa appointment, the consular officer will have background information that the student doesn't necessarily know about. So they do have like a baseline of information. And I should say that we advise students on this, and a lot of our recruitment partners also advise on this, because being able to successfully obtain a visa is key to being able to come here. Mm-hmm. So the things to understand about the visa interview are, remember, this is a non-immigrant classification of visa. It's not a pathway to citizenship or permanent residency. So the initial attitude of the State Department representative who's doing that interview is, the person applying for a visa is an intended immigrant. They need to prove to me otherwise. So their initial stated response to visa interviews is I'm going to deny unless something else comes up that changes my mind. The three main things that a visa officer is trying to ascertain in order to be successful, this doesn't mean they'll ask questions about all three things, but one, the student has to have the resources to finance themselves for the education. So international students don't get FAFSA. There's no federal financial aid, there's no student loans or anything like that. And international students are prohibited from working off campus unless there's like an internship or some kind of authorization. So the only kind of thing that they'd be able to do is work on campus up to 20 hours per week, and that's not enough to pay for tuition and living expenses and things like that. So part of the application process and the visa process is demonstrating that you've got the financial resources to pay for yourself while you're here. Number two is you have to show that you have ties to your home country, that the reason I'm going abroad to get this education is going to tie back to something with my family or business or what I want to do back in my home country. Again, they're intended immigrants or non-intended immigrants. Prove to me why you're coming back. The third thing that they have to demonstrate is they have a genuine understanding and knowledge about the program and university that they're going to. They don't want it to appear that somebody else is telling this person to go there, that if they can't say something about SEMO or their academic program, then it's very likely that they'll be denied that visa. So that's the gist of it, is those three things are what the visa officer is looking for in every single one of those student visa applications.
So you're the visa officer, I'm the international student trying to get applied. We're having our conversation, and some clicks to you, you deny me. Like I'm not passing. What is my next steps? What is the
You can reapply. You can reapply for a visa, and frankly, in a lot of countries, specifically Vietnam is now our number 5 population of international students. We do have a number of people that are denied in their first attempt and successful in their second attempt. And it's you know, it's a tough job for the visa officers. I mean, they're trying to ascertain a lot of information in a short period of time. They probably have wall-to-wall 3-minute visa interviews, you know, day after day, week after week. And you know, you'd like to think that everything is objective, but there's some subjectivity in there that, you know, if the visa applicant is nervous or their English isn't, you know, as strong, or, you know, they seem kind of just nervous or something, then that visa officer is kind of tipped off on that and kind of inclined to go one way or another. So that second time you apply, okay, I know what to expect now. I'm a little bit more confident. I got a little bit more kind of coaching on how to approach this and what to say. So they're oftentimes more successful. Now, if the visa officer denied them for something in their history or their family's history or criminal conduct or something, then they're never going to get that visa. But more often than not, it's just kind of headspace and circumstances and things like that why people might have been denied.
Okay, Dr. Timlin, that is all that I have for you on the SEVIS and visa
Okay.
issues. I'm going to go ahead and take some time to ask you about the enrollment and financial impact
Okay.
that international students have, especially the SEMO. So my first question on this topic is, have the challenges that students face while getting a visa had any direct impact on the international student enrollment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. That what happened over the summer. So to back up a little bit, you know, fall is our biggest intake of the year. You know, it's the beginning of the school year. That's when most people are starting. So that's when most of our international students are starting as well. And that goes across the country, obviously. The norm had been at embassies and consulate offices where people apply for their visa around the world was you can apply for a visa 1 year out from your start date. But the big crush of visa applicants, of people coming to the U.S. to study, is in May, June, and July. And what has typically happened, and again, the norm, was that those embassies and consulate offices would adjust resources in May, June, and July to specifically focus on the crush of student visa applicants. So you could apply for it year-round, but they really put additional resources towards it in May, June, and July. I forget what the actual number is, but we did the data or looked at it, and I think approximately 60% of our new student class in the fall gets their visas approved in those 3 months. So the majority are approved at that point in time. This year, embassies did not put additional resources in May, June, and July towards processing student visas. So the number of slots available were considerably lower. And for 1 full month during that May, June, and July period, they put a pause on processing any student visas because they were implementing an additional social media screening process. So that whole visa application time period, they added an additional step to it, which made each application longer, but they also took 1/3 of that crucial time to not doing any visa applications. So our numbers were considerably lower, and it wasn't because we had fewer applications, it wasn't because we had fewer admits, it was just simply fewer people were able to obtain visas for this intake.
Very interesting. Is there like a solution to that in the future? How do we get those numbers back up?
Well, I mean, we're doing everything we can in terms of really focusing on the students and making sure that they understand the process, make sure they understand if and when they can get visa applications, how to be prepared and how to be successful. We're focusing more, and keep in mind that State Department decisions on successful visas hinge upon a lot of different things. They'll tell you that each case is adjudicated individually. It's really just the circumstances of the person who's applying for the visa. But in reality, there are countries that have higher rates of immigration, that you have, they look at if I'm from this country and X% of people who come on student visas go out of status and become undocumented in the U.S., well, then that country's embassy is probably going to be predisposed to be more critical. And so there are some countries where it's perceived to be a little bit easier to get a visa because they don't have that out-of-status rate, and some where it's a little bit more difficult. So one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that we're really focusing on where we can make a difference. We've got limited resources in terms of recruiting as it is, but the resources that we do have, we're trying to make sure that it's going to make a difference and it's going to have the biggest impact. So we're really focusing a lot on individual attention on those applicants to make sure that they're dialed into SEMO, that they're prepared, that, you know, if you're not able to, one thing that happens quite a bit too is, say I'm admitted for the fall intake, but I can't get a visa appointment until September. Obviously, you're not going to be able to start on this intake, so you have to work with our admissions team to defer. You have to get a new I-20. You have to do a lot of things. So we're being very proactive in terms of providing support for those students and you know, maximizing the yield on the students that we do have that are applying and able to get visa appointments.
You mentioned earlier that Vietnam was 5th in SEMO admission. Do you have that top 5 list or the list of the number, the most?
Yep. And you know, so our top 5 are Nepal is number 1, Bangladesh is number 2, India is number 3, Zimbabwe is number 4, and Vietnam is number 5.
Okay.
And what's striking about this is if you looked back 10 years ago, India was number 2. None of those other 4 countries were even close to our top 5. That we've had, you know, back to your initial question about is this a crisis, it has been an incredibly topsy-turvy roller coaster-like existence where, you know, it's really hard to be strategic and to be long-term thinking just because the situations on the ground change constantly. And you can't throw bad money after good or good money after bad. And so we've constantly had to pivot. And you know, that top 5 population, back then, 10 years ago, it was Saudi Arabia, it was China, it was India. Right now, Saudi Arabia and China are probably not even in our top 40. India is still hanging on at number 3, but it really is just an evolving situation, and we've got to kind of make sure that we're aware of all the trends and kind of, you know, putting our resources and our efforts where it's going to count.
Are there specific reasons for that, for the change in?
Yeah, definitely. Saudi Arabia was, I don't know if you remember the Arab Spring, it was called. There were a lot of kind of pro-democracy movements in the Middle East, like in 2009, 2008. Saudi Arabia implemented what was called the King Abdullah Scholarship Program. And in a way, it was kind of a way to not have the same effects of the Arab Spring as the other countries did. And what they did is they provided study abroad money for just about any qualified citizen and their spouse and their children, and they could come and study English, do a bachelor's degree, do a master's degree, do a PhD. And there, I mean, across the country from 2005 to 2015, this King Abdullah Scholarship was I mean, sending hundreds of thousands of Saudi students to the U.S. Well, King Abdullah died, and this was the King Abdullah Scholarship, and the next king kind of decided to do this a little bit of a different way. And so those numbers really dropped off precipitously after King Abdullah died. China was number 1 in the U.S. They're still up there, but they predominantly attend higher ranked institutions and big research institutions. But a decade ago, the reason why we had so many Chinese students in the United States wasn't necessarily because the best and the brightest were coming here. It was more because they had such a huge population with a low number of higher ed institutions. They couldn't domestically meet the demand for an educated population of their students. You know, the top 5-10% of Chinese students is probably equal to the number of high school graduates that we have every year. So there just weren't enough opportunities for Chinese, and the same case for India, to get education in their home country, so they had to go to other places. That's what drove a lot of it, in my opinion, 10 years ago. But in the 10 years since, China has invested a great deal in their own higher ed sector. They've improved the university, they've increased the number of universities, they're keeping more of their domestic students at Chinese universities, and they're more of a competitor to us in attracting students from around the world. So that whole dynamic has really changed in China as well, where they're thinking more inwardly as opposed to outwardly. And India has remained pretty constant. They're still a very strong market for the United States.
Okay, it's a very unique perspective. Thank you for that. I want to get into some financial impact. We can't talk about international students right now in America without talking about the financial impact they bring. The U.S. Department of Commerce estimates that international students contribute $39 billion to the U.S. economy annually. How does the decline in enrollment of international students affect the economy?
Well, I mean, you kind of answered it with that statistic right there. And again, like kind of going back to the answer I gave about, you take away international students, what does that do to the educational community? It's the same thing with finances. If you look historically over the last 20 years, the kind of ratio of who pays to educate a student has flipped. These are not exact numbers, so, but I want to say close to 20 years ago, 70% of the cost to educate a student was paid for by the state in public institutions. 30 was tuition. Okay, so tuition was much lower. Over the course of the last 20 years, that has completely flipped. We're getting 30% or so, roughly. Again, I don't have the exact numbers, but 70% of the cost to educate comes from tuition. So we as institutions are much more reliant upon enrollment to cover the costs to operate and to educate. And with that in mind, every single student is important. Whether it's international, whether it's domestic, like any kind of enrollment is critical to an institution in terms of finances. And so that's what we're seeing with international students. When you hear news stories about international students, especially like in larger, media outlets, a lot of the focus is on, flagship or highly ranked or Ivy League, like your Harvards and things like that. And what the comment that you always hear is that well, international students are paying 2 times as much or 3 times as much tuition, so that revenue is important. If you're a highly ranked institution and you're selective and you're not having enrollment issues, you can get away with charging international students a higher amount because that demand is going to be there and you're going to find people to fill those seats. When you're a regional public university, if you price yourself out of the market, they're going to find Central Missouri, they're going to find Murray State, they're going to find Western Illinois or something like that. So this whole notion that international students automatically pay more, granted, we do have an international and a domestic tuition rate, but we also have scholarships where a transfer student with a 3.0 GPA is getting the equivalent of in-state tuition. And so just kind of understanding that dynamic is the idea that international students are taking seats away from U.S. students. Well, maybe in a place like Harvard or in a place like Chapel Hill or something like that, but at SEMO, international students are doing more to enable domestic students to study in different programs than they are anything else. They're not taking away anything, and we don't have the luxury, nor would we want to charge them an exorbitant amount to come here for that. So, it's undoubtedly, a challenge when you lose any pool of enrollments, whether that's, early college credit or, I bring up student athletes or, there's a lot of different populations that equally have a large effect on us financially, and international students are part of that. They're a visible population, and it's kind of noteworthy now. But yeah, I mean, any loss in enrollment is a challenge for the institution.
100%. I asked this next question kind of in the broad stand. We've been talking about SEMO. Tell me about, and you mentioned enrollment, international students pay a higher enrollment than domestic students pay. Tell me more about these fees that international students are having to pay that are different than domestic students, like taxes and like enrollment.
Hey, there really aren't any differences other than a separate tuition rate. You know, we used to have just in-state and out-of-state, and international students fell in that out-of-state. SEMO made the decision, I think a wise one as far as I'm concerned, to kind of get rid of that in-state distinction so that anybody from the U.S. has the ability to come and pay that tuition rate. So we do have a different domestic tuition rate, but again, we do have automatic merit-based scholarships for international students so that if you're qualified, it's going to bring that cost down. You know, other than that, you know, they pay the same dorm fees, they pay the same, you know, I think the challenge financially is that they don't have the ability to work off campus in the way that a domestic student would. You know, both domestic students and international students have first-time enrollment fees. They pay the same general fees. And so, I mean, it really, other than that differentiated tuition rate, there's that. Now, going back to the visa application process, there's a CVIS fee and a cost for applying and getting your visa that a student might be around $500 total between those two of them. I'm not 100% sure on that number. But once they're here, once they're, you know, it's the same.
Okay. How does the decrease in international student enrollment affect international services financially?
Well, I mean, the good side is that we have more time to focus on the individual students and building a community and making sure that everybody feels welcome. And again, that idea that we want all of our students to feel empowered to be ambassadors and to share their culture and things like that. But you know, it's a matter of resources too. You know, we have to make sure that we're proving our wealth and doing everything we can to make sure that this rebounds. And again, like, you know, if you understand enrollment and enrollment management and what our Division of Enrollment Management and Student Success is all about, it's not just about recruiting on the front end to get students here, it's how do you retain these students. So we kind of now are taking a little bit more of a focus in that international student service side of it to make sure that our students feel welcome and belong, or that they feel a sense of belonging and that they're valued so that they continue to remain at SEMO. Another important part of international recruitment is word of mouth too. And so, you know, we do a lot with recruitment partners and marketing and things like that. But one of the most effective recruiters is a happy student who's going to tell their friends, tell their family, and then the parents tell other people. And so making sure that we're keeping that positive vibe going and that positive word of mouth going is kind of where we're putting additional attention through the International Student Services Office right now.
Okay. And this is me asking curiosity. You asked, or you mentioned that international students can't work off campus. Is that a SEMO thing, or is that a U.S.-wide thing?
That's a function of the F1 visa. That's a federal regulation.
Okay, and those 20 hours a week for students, is that a SEMO thing, or is that a federal all students?
Federal also.
Okay.
So the F1 visa stipulates that you're only allowed to work on campus up to 20 hours a week during the semester. During breaks, you can work on campus up to 40 hours per week. But off-campus employment is prohibited unless you get some kind of work authorization. So there are ways for students to get authorization to work off campus. So we don't always assume if we see somebody working off campus that it's not allowed. One of the big things that happens is we all know how important internships are, you know, experiential education and being able to have real world experiences by the time you graduate. You know, that rule of not being able to work off campus kind of hurts when you're talking about an internship. So we do have a way to get authorization for students to do internship credit off campus, but there's a process that they have to go through. It doesn't cost them any money. It has to be for academic credit and it has to be signed off on by their advisor. But we do have students then who are able to take advantage of this authorization to do internships.
Okay. My next question for you is, does SEMO offer any financial aid or specific monetary values to international students specifically?
Other than like if you're aware of the scholarship program on the domestic side, it's all based on your GPA and test score and things like that. We have the exact same types of awards for international students that, based on their test scores, their GPA, they're going to qualify for certain scholarships. Really, other than that, that's it. I think that we as an institution have done everything we can to keep the cost of tuition low. And that kind of benefit is spread to everybody as opposed to having additional aid in certain places. Now, there's obviously endowed scholarships that there are probably, I want to say about 12 to 15 endowed scholarships that are specific to international students, but those are very competitive. They're not anything you can really count on as a student. It goes to a limited number of students. And so really that's it. It's just a merit-based scholarship. But like I said, part of the application process and the visa application process is demonstrating that you have the funds to come here before you come here. So, I mean, we all know things happen with families and, people have difficult times financially and things like that, and things come up. But by and large, the student has already demonstrated that they've got the resources to be here before they even come. We do, there was an emergency student fund through the United Way that we've had students get relief from. And we do what we can through SFS to kind of, work with students to make sure that they're being treated fairly, and we're trying to figure out whatever solutions we can.
My final questions for you, I just want to ask about the resources that international students have available to them on campus. So what kind of academic resources does a university provide for international students?
Well, the exact same as a domestic student. Again, there's no differentiated. They're SEMO students. They have access to all the academic support services. Yeah, I mean, there really isn't anything different in terms of academic. I did mention our International Student Services Office. They do a number of kind of advising cultural types of things to help students. That office, we really want them to help build a community for the international students that they feel welcome and comfortable in, and help maximize their presence on campus. We do have, the counseling center is always a great resource too. There's a number of counselors there who have specific intercultural types of counseling experience and knowledge. And we also require our international students to carry an insurance plan that's offered through the university, just because there's certain things in terms of repatriation of mortal remains or emergency evacuation, and if a student got sick here, we don't want them having to pay $15,000 for a broken arm. So through the insurance plan that we offer, there's additional international student cross-cultural types of counseling that's available to them.
And I know, just quickly, I know that the International Village has been destructed recently. Is there any kind of other plans for housing for international students?
I'm glad you brought that up. So that whole complex used to be called Cottonwoods. It was a youth mental health type of live-in environment. Cottonwoods in 2018 or so, 18 or 19, got a different place in town, and they left that facility, which opened the door for us to go there. And if you had ever been to the International Village, when you pull into the parking lot, we have a big administrative building, which most of our things happen in, and then 2 cottages, and those are where our intensive English language courses are delivered. And then on the south side, or the left side of the parking lot when you pull in, the original plan was for those to be res life and like living learning communities, short-term housing, and all those different things. It turned out that those were so far out of code to bring them up to the standard you needed for residence life that we never had the money to do that. So those cottages on the south side of the parking lot were never occupied since it's been the International Village. Those are the buildings that have been torn down. So none of our operations or none of the facilities that we've been in since 2019 are affected. In fact, now we're happy to have a green space there. We can do more kind of like picnics and bonfires and things like that for international students. So that had no impact whatsoever on our housing offers or what we do with international students or in international education and services.
What are those housing offers that international students can be offered when they come to the U.S.? Like, where can they live and what kind of transportation is offered to them?
Exact same as a domestic student. There's a couple of ways that schools think about it, and a lot of times it's kind of cyclical. But ideally, we don't want to separate our international students from the domestic students. That again, it's an educational community. We don't want separate pools. We want them integrated and kind of collaborating. So we don't have specific international student housing that's available. There's been talk of a learning community, a living learning community that would kind of combine study abroad interest and maybe international business and international students. But really, an international student has the exact same options as a domestic student when it comes to on-campus residency. But, they are a little bit different because, I mentioned they come from different cultural backgrounds. I mentioned that, they might not understand everything. Well, that's where our office comes into, is we're the primary advocates for international students. We're the ones that we do a lot of training across campus to make sure people are aware of the uniqueness and support. And knowing, like, for an international student, they can always come to us when they have any kind of issue. We're happy to help.
Dr. Timlin, that concludes the questions that I have for you for this special section broadcast. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I appreciate you and everyone on the Arrow for your interest in this important topic. I would say that, framing it as a crisis, again, I know it's a challenge, but I can tell you, as a person who's not from here, again, I've been here for 9 years, I have honestly seen nothing but honest and genuine support for international students from everybody in our community, whether it's administration, whether it's faculty, whether it's other students. And I just want to thank the entire community because I don't think everybody realizes how highly internationalized as a campus and a community we are. And so for you guys to give me this opportunity to talk about a lot of these, hopefully I wasn't too far in the weeds and I didn't lose kind of any kind of conversational track with some of these details. But it is essential for us to all understand that we're in an environment now where there's so many different sources of information that can't all be trusted, or people are using terminology incorrectly. It's really important for us to understand what is real, how we're defining certain things, and what the circumstances or consequences to certain things are. So thank you, and to everybody on the Arrow for allowing me this opportunity.
And thank you. With Dr. Timlin, my name is Kyler Messenger, and this has been the special section broadcast produced by the Southeast Arrow. Thank you for watching.